All right, I think we are ready to go. We're at 4 past the hour, so it is 10:04 here in the Bay Area. Well, welcome everyone to this week's Trey Labs. For the first time, Amber is not teaching, so if you came in here expecting her, she's still here, but I'll be your professor today. Oh, nope, okay. So my name is Sarah. I manage our customer success engineering team here at Trey. So if you've written in a ticket or sent an email to support@trey.io, either myself or one of our team members has been the person responding. As TAs today, we have Amber from Solutions Architecture and Grant, who's also a member of our customer success engineering team. If during the course of this lesson you have any questions at all, please put them in the Q&A box you should find it in your little Zoom bar, and one of them will follow up with you directly there. So for those of you who may be new, Trey Labs is a bi-weekly enablement session. It's held every other Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We're open to other suggestions for time, though. If you have anything, please put that in the feedback or respond to the email that comes through after this session. Anyone can attend. If you have access to Trey itself, that's most helpful, so you can actually walk along as we're doing this lab, this walkthrough together. But if you don't have access to a Trey account, that's just fine as well. You'll still be able to learn something by watching as we go through. In terms of accessing resources, all of these sessions are recorded and they go up on our Trey Labs website, which when you go in, it's just trey.io/trey-labs, and you'll be able to see all the previous sessions. It might be kind of under the fold, so you have to scroll down a little, but that's where all the previous sessions will be. So if you miss something, don't worry, you can still access it later. And in terms of registering for future webinars, even if you don't get the email like you, Delaney, you can always go to trey.io/webinar/register-trey-labs. I also want to encourage folks, especially if you're newer to Trey, to check out Trey Academy. It's our online learning platform. It'll give you a basic overview of what Trey is, and then there are some more lessons on things like HTTP connector just came out, just basic planning of your automated or your workflows and your automations. So really helpful resource for everyone. I also want to give a quick plug that we are now on Reddit. If you go to reddit.com/r/Trey.io. So we've got a few customers in there who post some of the stuff that they've been doing. For instance, here's someone who posted a script that they use to format records for Salesforce batch creation. So you can go in there, you can share your own things that you're doing with Trey or comment on what other customers have done. We don't actively monitor it, it's more of a community space, but just want to make sure people are aware of that. One final note is, as we go through this lab, we're going to be talking a lot about how to navigate the Trey canvas itself, so that you know beyond just what we're doing immediately, like why we're doing what we're doing, the tips and tricks, so that as you're going out and building your own workflows, you know how to use all the tools and parts of the platform as well as you possibly can, or as well as I can teach you in the next hour, hour and a half. So the way the session will be structured is we're going to build in sections to make sure that we don't, present this overwhelming, here's, 10, 20, 30 steps all at once. We'll build in small sections. We're going to test each section as we go to make sure we know exactly what's happening there. And this is something that I definitely recommend doing as you're building your own workflows. You don't want to get to the end of your workflow, start testing. Now you've got some complicated stuff and you don't know what's going wrong. Just build it slowly, test in sections. I'll also pause for questions, though again, The best way to do that will probably be to put your question in the Q&A, but if you have something burning and want to speak up, by all means do. So today's use case is auditing your workflow. And what that means is building into your workflow ways to check on exactly what it's doing and send that information wherever makes sense for you. In this case, we're going to email a report to ourselves at the end of the run. And this is really useful for making sure that you know what's happening with your workflow without having to go into Tray to check, or not realizing it until you look in your end tool that something looks wrong perhaps. In our case here, we're going to be getting some leads. We're going to audit whether those leads had the correct information or not, add the successes and errors to their own respective reports, and then we'll email that report to ourselves. This is really the more important thing to get beyond the specifics of what we do. It's the concept of auditing your workflow. You probably don't have this exact use case in your account today, but you probably have something that could benefit from being able to audit it along the way. So, take this as more of like a jumping off point versus I'm going to go and implement this exact thing in my workflow. Final note here is some of the connectors we'll be spending the most time with are the CSV editor, the object helper, and the HTTP client. So hopefully you'll walk away knowing a little bit more about at least one of these after today's session. So broken down the workflow into 5 different sections. We're going to start by pulling our lead data, and there's a service that you can use. I will post that to you all momentarily. We're going to prep the materials we need for creating the reports. We're going to check the data, the lead data that came through for hygiene, so seeing like what's successful, what's an error. We're going to actually do the audit, so update our reports. And then finally, we're going to do the reporting, which is sending those reports along to ourselves via email. So now we're going to start getting into our canvas. So step 1 is pulling the data. So we're going to create a new workflow. We're going to set a manual trigger, and then we're going to pull our lead data. So let me get out of full screen here. And let me actually just, before I start, so you all have this, put this into the chat for everyone. So this is the endpoint or the service that we're going to be using. Can everyone see that? Can you give a thumbs up or something perhaps in the chat? Okay. And Nikosha, I see your question, but I'm going to let the TAs follow up on that. Okay, great. You all can see it. Perfect. All right, so let's jump into Tray. So pull up Tray, your general workflow area. We're going to create a new workflow. Give it a name that makes sense. I like to name anything that we're doing through this lab session, brackets, Tray Labs, close brackets. You can see I've done this before because I'm going to give this the same name I used before. Workflow audit example. Next step, we're going to select a manual trigger, which you can click here. You can always just start typing if you need to find something. And the reason we're using a manual trigger is we're doing testing. We want to be able to run this whenever and how much we need without having to wait for a scheduled trigger to run again, or wait for a webhook to come in or something like that. In the real world, this is, again, something I recommend doing. And then once you have your workflow set up and running, you can switch the trigger over to whatever it is you'll be using when it's live. So we'll check our manual trigger and create workflow. Just preparing. All right, it might be ready for the long weekend too. Let's see. No, we'll just give it a little refresh. Just All right. Running a little slow today. I apologize for that. Let's see if it might still let me create one. Okay, that came up anyway. So we're just going to do this again really quick. Tray Labs. I'm just going to click on this because it's in memory now. Go to next step again. Oh, it did create it. Okay, I apologize there. Let's search here. Actually, let me just search for audit. All right, here we go. All right, apologies for that, everyone. Okay, so now we're in our new workflow. We're going to select the HTTP client and drag that over here. And the reason we're using the HTTP client is this is a custom service that we built just for this example. It's not something we already have in our catalog. And so if ever you're trying to connect to something that is not currently in the catalog that you can see by scrolling down here, here are all the connectors actually in our catalog. You can use the HTTP connector to access it, and it really opens up the world of what you're able to do with Tray beyond just what we already have included, which is several hundred connectors on its own. Let me close the Zoom videos here. All right, so we've got our HTTP client. The way I like to approach anytime I add a new connector is once I've clicked on it and open the properties panel here on the right, I like to start at the top and then just make my way down to make sure I don't miss anything that's going on. And also so that I start with the best practice here, which is always naming your steps something that makes sense. There's a few reasons for this. One is making sure that you or someone else can come in and just by reading the names of the steps, have a decent idea of what this workflow is doing. The other part, which we'll see in a little bit, is that as you're debugging a workflow, it's going to make sure that when you're going through the steps, it makes sense what each is doing. You don't have to back reference constantly. It's just, by reading each step, you're like, okay, I did this and this and this, and logically, I know what that means. So first step title, I'm going to call it Get Leads, because we're going to get all the leads that we have in our service. We're going to skip the step description. We don't need more, but you can put that in there too. We don't actually have an authentication we need to do for this one, but in a lot of cases, that's probably going to be your next step. Anytime you're adding an HTTP client, you'll need some sort of authentication. For the operation, we're going to choose get. And what get is, if you're not familiar, is just saying, hey, service, I just need some information. I'm not trying to give you anything. I just need some. It's like you go to the restaurant, you need to see the menu, like what's here, what's on offer. So we're going to get, and then we're going to plug in this URL that I just gave everyone. So we'll put that in there. Headers, don't need anything there. No query parameters. And now we're at the end. Great. So now we are ready to run our first test. So I'm going to go up to the top of my canvas and click on debug. So that way, when we do this run, I can see the logs that come through. I'm going to go to the bottom right here, click run workflow. Great, green. Green is always a good sign in Tray. So we ran our trigger, we got our leads. Let's look at what's in here. So the input is what originally went in. So you can see there's not much here. We've got the URL that we put in. And then in our output, I'll expand this. We've got a response, general, status code 200 means good, headers, some basic info here. And then the interesting part that we want to see is in the body. And this is where we have a list or an array. Those terms mean the same thing. We have a list of the leads. So we can see each one has a first name, last name, company, campaign ID, and email. Okay, great. So now we've got our data. So if you have any questions at this point, please put those in the Q&A, and TAs, please interrupt me if there's something that we should address more broadly. Are folks following along? Can you give either just a quick chat or thumbs up though, as like if you're able to do this so far? All right, I see a raised hand, and Amber Grant, I think we'll follow up there. And let me know if I should pause here, but otherwise just review what we did. Full screen, sorry about that. So we created a new workflow, we selected a manual trigger for testing, and then we added an HTTP client connector for connecting to our service. So up next, we're going to start our report prep, which is getting the things we need ready so that we can build out our reports that we'll be sending on later. So this will include a date timestamp helper, a create success report CSV, and a create error report CSV. Also, I apologize, I should have mentioned in this hypothetical use case, we're going to say that this is running once a day. So that's why you'll see in a moment when I use our date time helper, I'm just going to set it to giving us the date rather than a timestamp as well. So going back to our connector panel on the left, we'll search for date, drag that here. Again, we will start right at the top. So for title, let's call it get today's date, something really easy to understand. For operation, it's not called today. If you search for that, nothing will happen, but it is called get current timestamp. For time zone, you can set this to whatever makes sense for you, whether you want your local time zone or something else. I'm just going to use UTC, which is the general default in a lot of cases anyway. A lot of services are going to use UTC, so it's often a safe bet. For format, so here's how we want this timestamp to actually look when Trey gives it back to us. You can set up your own custom format. There's a lot of fancy things you can do. Luckily, we're not doing anything too fancy today. So we're just going to use an existing format. And then when you click on this dropdown, you'll see a bunch of options here. I'm going to choose my favorite default, which is year, month, day. This is a nice international format too, since I know in the US, we often like to do things month, day, year, which other countries don't. So if you stick with this format, your friends in other offices, you're all going to be on the same page as to what day this actually happened. All right, scroll to the end. And all right, so that's it. We don't have to do anything else. Next, let's go to CSV. So when you type in CSV, you're going to get two options, editor or reader. The details of when you need which are probably better served by your use case and going to our docs and like reading through those details. But I can tell you in general, since we're going to be creating a CSV and then editing it, we want the editor. So kind of makes sense. Anytime you're going to be like accessing data and probably manipulating it, you're probably going to want the editor. All right. So as always, we will start at the top. So we're creating the report for the first time. So I'm just going to call this create success report. Scroll down. So we're not creating a CSV from a file. We don't have an existing file. We are just creating the CSV just in memory. We're just within the context of Tray itself. We're just creating the CSV, and then at the end of the workflow, it's going to go away. So create CSV. Scope is current run, meaning this only needs to exist for each individual run of the workflow. Number of columns. So this is where we want to go back and refer to what we got from our get leads option here. I also realized I forgot to tell you all something that's both important and cool for use in future steps from this get leads option. So let's look at that really quickly. So we go back to our debug step, click on that run, get leads. And the thing I want to show you is, so at the bottom of get leads, it's got this generic output, which any HTTP client is going to give you this generic output, but for us, it's going to be helpful to refer to exactly what this step gave us. So we can use this option here, use output. So click on this and then keep your eye, if you can, both at the same time, on the output section in the bottom right of your screen. And now you'll see this is updated. So now it's actually referencing the data that came through. So this is going to be really handy in a few more steps when we're starting to reference the data that's coming from one step versus another. So the thing we wanted to come in here and check, though, was how many columns should we have, aka how many results are coming through. And we can see this one has 5. We'll do a quick check. Yeah, most of them have 5. Okay, I think 5 is probably pretty safe. So let me make that a little smaller because we'll keep that up as reference. We'll go back to our Create Success Report. So now for columns, we'll set this to 5. And then we need to name each of the columns in this column section rather than clicking this 5 times, or if you've got a bigger CSV, 10, 20, 100 times, you can add more than one item to columns at a time. So we'll click 5 there as well. Add. And then we're just going to name each of these exactly as they came in from the API. You don't have to do that, but these names are already pretty nicely formatted. So we're just going to use them exactly as is. So we'll do first name. Data type here is text. You'll notice there's other types here. We don't need to worry about those today, but you can set this to something other than text, obviously. Last name, text. Company, text. You only have to watch me do this 2 more times, I promise. For now. Campaign, it'd help if I could spell, campaign ID, text, and then finally, email, text. Great. So we'll keep scrolling just to make sure there's nothing else. Rows, no rows, we don't have any data yet. All right, so that's it. And now, for the good news, is we can just copy this step for our error report and just make a few changes. We don't have to type all this out again. So to do that, I'll switch over to build mode now so you have more room to see. To do that, you're just going to hover on your Create Success Report step, go to the left and these 3 dots, click that once, and then we'll go to Duplicate Step. Now, I know there's also this copy step and paste configuration. I will be touching on those a little bit later. But for now, we'll just use Duplicate Step. So now you see we've got the CSV-2 here. We'll click on it. And anytime you've got something that you've duplicated, really double check that you've clicked on the correct one, because you, and I've learned this the hard way more than once, you don't want to go through updating a step only to find you did the wrong one. In this case, it's easy to swap, but if you've got it in more complex logic, it's just a pain to have to undo and redo that work. So this is our error report. So we'll say create error report. Operation is the same. The scope, the number of columns, the column names, these are all going to be the same. Nothing to do there. All right, that's really all we need to do. So now we've created the error report. So now we've got everything prepped for actually creating our reports. Can folks give a quick thumbs up or other note in the chat if you were able to do that? And if not, like if you need to raise your hand or ask a question, again, Amber or Grant will happily follow up with you. So just jumping back in here quickly. So just, again, quick review. We like to tell you what we're doing multiple times just to help it sink in. So in this case, we added a date time helper connector to get today's date. We added a CSV editor connector to create our skeleton for the success report. And we added a second CSV editor step to create the skeleton for our error report. Next, data hygiene. So now we're going to start looping over that list of leads. We're going to check that each lead has all the keys necessary, because in this case, we're making the assumption that in order for a lead to be updated in our end system, it has to have each piece of data. If it's missing anything, it's going to fail. And so that's not going to work. We need to send that to the error side. So that's where we're going to check all the lead keys. And then we're going to set up a Boolean or true false condition to check if that particular lead has all the keys needed. So going back to our canvas. So in the connector panel, let's search for loop and go to loop collection. Again, as always, starting at the top, let's just give it a simple name like loop leads. So we're going to loop over all our leads, or you can be, if you want 3 L's, loop leads list. Our operation will be loop list, although you can do, you can loop over objects with this. There's also use cases for loop forever, but we won't get into those today. For the list, and this is where it came in handy that we did that use output operation on our HTTP client, get leads up here. We're going to use that to feed in as our list. And to do that, we're going to use our snake connector. So to access that, you're going to go onto list. You're going to hover over the bubble right to the left of it, and you should see this yellow color highlight and this little cross show up. You're going to click on that, and then you're going to drag it. So that's our snake connector. You're going to drag it up to get leads. You're going to let go. And now this is giving us the output that came through on that step. And we want to choose body. So in this case, it's the only thing highlighted because it's the only list. And the way you know something is a list within or an array, again, either term, within the output is it's got these 2 brackets next to it. So brackets for list, this little table for an object, an A for string, et cetera, et cetera. But so we're just going to click on that. And now you'll see that shows up here in what is called the JSON path. So JSON paths are always going to start with a $sign. Another thing to make sure of, this did it automatically, but whenever you've got a JSON path as the input, you need to make sure that this input drop down here is in fact set to JSON path. So it's always going to have this little icon. But if you don't have it set to that, it's going to try and take in the literal string. Oh, I broke it. Right, let's do that again real quick. No worries. But just otherwise, it's going to take in this literal string as the input, which is not something you can loop over. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. All right, so now we're going to add an object helper. I'm going to drag that down here. And so the object helper connector, just kind of as a self-explanatory perhaps, but it has a bunch of operations that are really useful when working with objects, which, just to make sure we're all on the same page, an object is anything in curly braces like this. So this, we would say this is the headers object because that's the key or the value in quotes before that. This whole thing is a body array because it starts with this, but then within there are individual objects. So here's one lead object. Here's the next lead object. So because we're iterating over or looping over a list of objects, we need the object helper here. I hope that made sense, but I can always go over that more later if need be. So I'll go back to build mode. And so within here, so what we're going to do, and let me just double check what I named it, check lead keys, just so I'm consistent with the deck. So we're going to call this check lead keys because we are going to be checking that all the keys that should be in there, all 5 keys for each lead, does in fact exist. So check lead keys. For the operation, we are going to go to this properties exist. So we just want to see, do all the properties that we think should exist actually exist in there? And when we click on that, I'll just scroll to the bottom quickly to show you what we're going to get out here. So we're going to get an array. So again, the brackets here, or a list of all the object keys, which will be first name, last name, campaign ID, etc. All the keys that were found, a list of any that were not found, and then this Boolean, or true false, which you can tell by this little check mark, that means Boolean, of were all found. And so we'll use that in the next step to determine, is this a success or is it an error? So for source, we're going to do our snake connector again up to the loop leads list. So we're going to drag this up here, and we're going to click on value. And that did auto-populate, you'll notice, even before we ran it and did use output, but because this list knows exactly which object it's pulling from, it can just intuit, okay, here's the object within the list I'm iterating over. So we're going to have an object for the lead. For the property keys, this is where we have to add in those same 5 keys again. So we'll type 5. And what's really important here is that you match the casing and spacing and all of that. This has to look exactly like it does in the original object. So if you did first name, it's going to fail. It's saying, I can't find that. Computers are actually very stupid. They can only do exactly what you tell them. The only reason they seem smart is because of all the smart people behind them. So first name, last name, campaign ID. And if any of these are out of order, that's fine. This does not actually have to be in order. I'm just going in the order as I remember it for convenience. Company and email. Great. So now we're going to check each object, make sure they have all these keys. Next, to actually validate that and do something with the object, if it does or doesn't, we're going to add a Boolean condition, which is at the top, but I'll just type that in. And again, just to reiterate, Boolean just means true, false. It means, does the given equation that you're giving it evaluate to true or evaluate to false? So in our case, well, actually, let me pause on the case. You'll see it in just a moment. So let's not break out of starting at the top and being thorough. So we'll start with giving it a name. I'll just call it has all keys, question mark. I like naming my Booleans as a question, since ultimately that's what they're doing, answering a question. For the operation, it's just a Boolean condition. You can also check if properties exist with this, but you can only do one at a time, which is why we want the object helper, which can check multiple at once. For the condition itself, the first value is going to be one of those outputs from the check lead keys step, specifically that found all Boolean of true, false. And you'll see how this all works when we run an example in just a moment. Let's pull the snake connector over to check lead keys. And we're going to scroll down to found all and check that. We're going to say, was found all equal to, and then for the type here, we're going to click on that. We're going to go down to Boolean because we want it to be true or false. And then we're going to check this checkbox. So whenever you're using Boolean as an evaluator within the Boolean step, checking the box means true, leaving it unchecked means false. We don't have to worry about case sensitivity. It's an auto true, false. Strictness, we only have one condition, so satisfy all conditions is fine, and that's it. And so before I test this, I'm actually going to put in another step temporarily, the terminate step. And this is really useful when you're testing something and you don't want other steps to go through. I also realized just now I failed you earlier. I did not test to make sure that we had actually created properly our CSVs and stuff. So we'll see if I get caught here. Apologies on that. But in this case, we're going to add a terminate into just the false branch because we've seen examples already in the list we scrolled through of leads that have all 5 keys. So we're expecting the true to show up, no problem. But we haven't seen if there are actually any leads that have less than 5, and we want to make sure that those are properly getting routed to the false branch. And the terminate step, what it does is as soon as your workflow hits that step, it's not going to do anything after it. So it'll pause a loop, or if you're doing something in production and you don't want to have to hit your API endpoint a bunch of times, just you can rearrange some steps, put the terminate before any of the stuff you don't want to run, and then that way you can be testing without actually hitting all your live data. So we'll see how this works live in just a moment. So we've got terminate there. Now let's go to debug mode. I'm going to go down here, run workflow. Going to wait for that to show up. Excellent, terminate. So let's just go up here just to, again, confirm everything that we're seeing. So here's a loop that has all 5. Check lead keys. You can see the found has all 5. Not found is empty. Again, as expected, found all is true. So has all keys, true. It went through this side of our branch. That last one where we terminated, so we can see the value. Okay, there's only 4 keys here. When we say check lead keys, it's saying I found 4, but I did not find campaign ID, and therefore found all is false. And so when we go to our Boolean, it did in fact hit the false branch and our terminate. All right, great. Everything is working as we expect so far. This is good. So before we move on, let me just get rid of my terminate. So I'm going to hover over it, go over to this little trash can icon, click on it, and confirm delete. Let's go back to build mode and then go back to our presentation quickly. Boop. So again, just reviewing yet again, in that step, we added a loop connector to loop over our list of leads. We added an object helper connector to confirm whether or not that lead had all the properties it needs. And then we used a Boolean connector to send that lead to either the true or success side or false error side based on the output from the object helper. Next, this is the meatiest part, but our second to last part, is where we do the actual auditing. So for the false side or the errors, we're going to tally up how many errors we have. So each time an error record comes through, we're going to make sure that the object has all the keys included in it, which I'll explain why in just a moment. And then we're going to update our error report. And then on the true side, similar, but first we're going to post that lead data elsewhere. This is our made up service for this lab, so you're not going to hurt anything, but we'll just briefly show how you would send a post message. We're going to update our success count, and then we're going to update our success report. So let's jump back into our workflow, and I'm going to start on the false side, in part because I like to work backwards, but in part because this is the side that's probably going to be more important or interesting to you in terms of what didn't happen. So we're going to start with a data storage connector. So you type data into your connector panel, grab data storage, bring it over here. So again, starting at the top of our properties panel with this selected, we're going to name it error count. For operation, we're going to use something which you may or may not have used before. I know Amber's used it in previous lab sessions on paginating and large data, but it's atomic increment. All you really need to know about that right now is it's a secure way to keep account of anything you need. In this case, we're using it just every time a lead goes through this false branch. We are going to just add 1 to whatever the previous value is. It defaults to 0 to start, so first one that comes through, we're going to have 1 for this total. Next one, 2, etc., etc. For the scope, again, current run, everything's going to be current run. We don't want this to persist after any given workflow run. For the key, I'm going to give it kind of a pretty formatting here because we're going to use this in our report later. So we'll just call it error count. Again, value to add, we only want to add 1 at a time. And that's it. That's all we need there. Great. Next, we're going to add an object helper. So again, go to your connector panel, search object, grab the object helper. And what we're going to do here is we're going to insert any of the keys that were originally missing into the object. And the reason is that we need all those keys available to update our CSV. If we don't have them all, CSV is going to say, hey, you're trying to give me something that doesn't exist. It's going to throw a reference error. And if you're wondering, like, well, why do this here? Why not just have done this up here? Like, why are we doing this property check in the first place? Well, again, in this scenario, we're saying that if any of that data is missing, it's not going to be able to update in our end service anyway. So we don't want to just try and shove it in with null values. It's not going to work. Instead, we need to register that it was missing something and then just do this quick update before we update our error report. I hope that made sense, but if not, again, ask a question or we can go over this at the end of the session. All right, so starting at the top of our new object helper, double checking I'm clicked on that, great. So we'll just call this enforce, or actually let's call it add missing keys. That's a little bit more, intuitive. Add missing keys. For the operation, it's called enforce object structure. So what this does is we give it an original object. So in this case, the lead object that came through our loop, and then we're telling it everything it should have in there. And if it's missing anything, it'll add it in. And you'll see we're going to add all 5 keys. And that's because we don't know which key might be missing on any given lead. So we need to make sure it's checking for all of them and adding any missing ones back in. So we're going to use our snake connector again. So the source is from the loop. So the original source is that original lead as it came in. So now we've got steps.loop1.value. For structure, we're going to have to type in these 5 names again. This is why we didn't set up more than 5 for this example. But so again, these don't have to be in order, but try and do them in order as best as I can. It's easier to remember. So first name, last name, campaign ID, company, and email. And then you'll notice by default, it just says no value here. We're actually going to set these to be null because we want to make it, we want to make it clear in our end report that this had no value. And so if we set it to a null, that's just going to come through really clearly. So for the type here on first name, we're going to click that A. We're going to go down here. We're going to select null. Same for the other 4. Click next to the key name and select null. So we'll just do that for the last 3. Again, you could have this be something else, but this is, nulls are kind of an easy call out when you see them in a report. All right, so that's it. And good news here is we'll be able to reuse this on the true side of our step. Finally, let's add our CSV editor again. So type in CSV into your connector panel, search for that, grab CSV editor. So we are going to do a quick test on this before we finish setting up the CSV editor. And I'll show you why in a moment, but let's just start it off with giving this a name. So update error report. Down to the operation, we're going to be adding a row. So add row, singular. For the CSV ID, that's something that's going to have come through when the CSV was created the first time. So we can use the snake connector to reference that. So again, hover over the bubble next to CSV ID, click and drag that, and make sure you're going up to the correct CSV report that you set up before, just so you don't end up seeing something confusing when you send the email out later. Cell values. So this is the last time for now. You'll have to type in these 5, but we're going to have to type the names again. And because we've been consistent, we shouldn't have to worry, but the important part here is that these cell values need to align with the original columns you set up back here. So we've been using the same type and casing and all that, so we'll just keep that consistent. So first name, last name, campaign ID, company, and email. And so we're going to actually run a quick test here, just so when we're populating these, we want to populate them based off of what came out of the add missing keys step. But right now, oh, it did show up. Okay, well, in prior versions of our connector, this didn't actually show up. So this is good news, surprise for all of us, that we can just go ahead and set this based on that without running the test. All right, every day is a learning adventure. Okay, so we're just going to do the snake case here then. So from first name up to the add missing keys, first name, last name, up here, last name, campaign ID, snake connector up to add missing keys, campaign ID, company, up here to company, and then email, up here to email. Great. And just to call out something else you may have noticed while we were doing that, these campaign ID, last name, and first name, these keys have a slightly different format, which is period, bracket, single quote, and then the name of the key, whereas company and email don't have that. That's just because by default with JSON, if a name or a key has a space in it, you can't use this format because it's, as soon as it hits a space, it's not going to know what to do. So that's why it has to be in this special bracket format. Nothing special actually about the data, nothing's wrong here, but just wanted to call that out in case you saw it and weren't sure what was going on. So we are going to run a quick test now just to make sure that this part of our flow is working. So we're going to grab our terminate again, bring it down here, get that set up, great. Let's go to debug, and let's run our workflow. So again, this way, it might loop through a few trues, but it'll stop as soon as we hit a false. It terminated, fantastic. So let's see. So we had the has all keys false, error count incremented by 1, add missing keys. All right, so you can see in this one, campaign ID was missing. So it added that in as a null. And then it updated our error report. Great. So let's delete that now.
And Sarah, real quick, I'm going to send out our poll just in case anyone needs to drop at the hour. Feel free to ignore it, but if you'd like to give us some feedback before you leave.
Yes, thank you, Amber. And yeah, by the way, if anyone needs to drop, I know it looks like we're going to go over just a little bit. But again, this will all be online, so you can always catch the very end of it on our website. All right. So in good news, we can reuse a lot of this stuff on our true branch. But first, we're going to start with the HTTP connector again. We're going to make a post request. So we're going to grab our HTTP client. I'm going to bring that over here. We're going to name this post lead. Just post lead, actually. We're just posting the lead. Authentication, none needed. Operation, again, post. And just to reiterate, post is when you're actually giving the service something. So you're saying, hey, I'm handing you something instead of just asking for something. So for the URL, we're going to use the same one you have up here in get leads. So same exact one. So we'll just copy that, paste it here. Keep going, no headers needed, no query parameters. But we do want to update the body type here, body being the actual data that you're passing to the service. So we are just going to choose raw, which means just raw format, just like as is. We're not doing anything special with it. That'll give you this option for raw here, which we're just going to use the lead as it came into the loop list yet again. So pretty easy. So grab your snake connector, pull that up here. Select value. And so great. So now we're sending this post request to the service with the data as it came in. So here's the lead. Here you go. We'll do a final test once I add these next two steps here. So for this, for the next step, now we're saying, well, actually, let me mention one other thing really quickly, but we won't go into full details here, is that we're making an assumption with this workflow that the post goes no problem, comes through, we can increment our count in our report. You can set up custom error handling for an individual step. For instance, if you wanted to do some auditing of what happened with this particular lead, even though it should have been posted, you can scroll to the bottom of that properties panel. And for error handling, click on that drop down and select manual. And now you'll have the option to do something special when there was an error. So again, you could have another report that you're updating and then something to do with the success. And you could leave success blank and it'll just continue on its merry way. But not something we have time to get into today, but I just wanted to call that out. So again, as you're thinking about your own workflows and what you want to be doing with them, you know that's an option. All right, so now let's add the count and update the report. So for count, this will be easy. And this time we're going to do the copy instead of duplicate. So we're going to go to our counter for error count, hover over that, click the three dots, go to copy step. Now we're going to come over here, hover over that plus sign. We're going to right click and paste step. And the only difference between duplicate and copy, and it's an important one, is copy will allow you to copy steps between different workflows. I often like using it as well if I'm, if I want to duplicate something that's in this section of the workflow, but I want to put it up here, because otherwise duplicate automatically puts a step right below the previous one, and you have to get it and drag it. And not a huge deal, but especially if you've got a workflow, this is just a little easier in my opinion. So we've copied that. Let's click on it, make sure we're clicking on the correct one. We don't want to update the wrong step. I'm going to start at the top again. This time it's a success count. Scope is current run. Key, I'm going to call it success count as well. Value to add. Okay, that's all we have to do on that one. Next, let's copy this error report. So copy step again by hovering over and clicking on those three dots, the ellipses. Come over here, right click, paste. Great. So again, double checking we're clicking on the right thing. For the step title, we're going to update success report. We're adding a row again. CSV ID, we definitely need to update this. We want to make sure we're grabbing the ID for the success report. So we'll grab that. And then other really important part is we'll see, oh, we are referencing right now, from here, we're trying to reference this. That's not going to work. Plus, we know all the keys already exist. That's why I went through this true branch. So we're going to grab all of these from the object as it came through the loop. So first name, last name, campaign ID, company, and email. All right, so that looks good. So let's just run one quick test on the true side to make sure everything looks the way we expect and nothing's breaking before we move on. So we'll grab our terminate again. We're going to drag it to the bottom of our true branch. We're going to go to debug. We're going to run our workflow. All right, it's running. It's terminated. Great, and I can see, again, just by naming the steps, I can see that it did go through the success side. One thing to look at whenever you're posting versus getting is you're probably going to get a different response for post versus get. So with get, we got that whole list of leads. In this case, we just sent a simple message, success, you updated it. But always something worth checking when you're posting data to see what the endpoint or what the service told you. Success count 1, and we added a row to our report. Great. So again, if you have any questions at this point, please reach out in the Q&A section or raise your hand and Amber or Grant will follow up with you. So I'm just going to delete this again. We are in the final stretch, folks. So just reviewing one more time what we did. So in this case, on the false side, we added a storage connector, a data storage connector to count the number of errors. We added the object helper to make sure that the lead object had all the necessary keys, but then had null for the value of any keys that were missing. And then we added that to the error report. On the true side, we added our HTTP client to make our update, our post request to our service with the lead information. We added another storage connector to keep count of our successes or our successful leads. And then we updated our success report with that information. All right, so last bit, we are going to get the final counts for our successes and errors. We're going to export our success and error reports, and then we can use those to send an email to ourselves in this case, but whoever you want to say, hey, here were the successful lead uploads, and here were the failed lead uploads for today. So going back to our workflow, one other pro tip, especially if you've got a bigger workflow, this one's not very big, but it's useful as you're continuing to build to just zoom out occasionally and make sure you know where you are in the workflow. For instance, the loop here, it ends here, not here. If you were to put this information right after the Boolean, you're going to get a bunch of emails for every single lead, which is not actually what you want. So again, just another tip for while you're building. So first we want to get those counts of the errors and the successes. So we're going to add another data storage step here. Again, starting at the top, we'll say get all counts. Maybe here we'll say get all success and error counts. We'll have this one be a little bit more verbose. For the operation, we want to get, and then we are going to get all keys. So we want both that success count and that error count key. And what we need to make sure, as we're scrolling down here, current run, yep, as always, is we need to make sure we check include values, because that's really the most important part for the reporting. How many successes were there? How many errors were there? Otherwise, you're just going to get the keys back, which you know they exist. Who cares? Page reference, nothing there. Page size, nothing we need to care about there. Great. Okay, that's the end. So that's get all counts. Next, we're going to do CSV editor again. So we're going to do that. Starting at the top as always. So we want to call this one export success report. So same order we did at the top. We're going to export our CSV. For the CSV ID, we want to make sure we get the success report ID. So we'll use our snake connector to go up here, pardon me. Scrolling down, we do want to include the header. We want to know what each column is actually doing. For file name, we'll say lead success report. And here's where we're going to use the date and time output that we got up here. And because we're using it with text, we can't use the snake connector. So let's go grab that JSON now, and then I'll show you how to put that in to the file name itself. I should have grabbed that first, but anyway, so we're going to click on get today's date. On the properties panel, we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom. We're going to hover over result, right click, get JSON path. And we're going to highlight this, press OK. I'm going to chuck it over here just in case I need it, because we actually will need it again. So I'd advise you too to just put this in a note somewhere. Let's go back down to our export success report. And so anytime you're going to use a JSON path within regular text, so within anything that has the type of string here, all you have to do is put that in curly braces. So these little things usually on top of your brackets on your keyboard. So make the curly braces and put that in there. So now this is going to say lead success report and then the date. For sort by, don't need to modify that. Delimiter, it is a CSV, it's a comma. We don't need to worry about that. No filters. Okay, that's the end of that. Great. So as always, let's just be a little lazy and just copy what we did. I'll use a duplicate step here since we do want it directly below the other step. So making sure I've clicked on this new report, export report. We're going to call this export error report. Same operation for the CSV. Again, we need to update this to access the error report we created up here, CSV2. So we'll drag the snake connector. And by the way, you can just simply type in here. Using the snake connector is just a way to make sure you really got the right information. You didn't accidentally make a typo or fat finger it. We want the header again for file name. This time it'll be lead error report. This could be suppression report. This is whatever you would call in a lead that you weren't able to update or for whatever service you're using. With the other connector, we didn't need to update any of this. Same here. This is all fine. And then, all right, final step, send email. So we're going to email this to ourselves so we can see what the output looks like. Or you're going to see my email in a minute, so you can email me too. The world will have my email. That's quite all right. So send email, starting at the top. Say email reports for operation. Yep, send email. There's really nothing else you can do here. So 2 recipients. So I am just going to Sarah@tray.io. My name. For the subject, so this is where we're going to grab our result from the date time stamp helper again, that's getting today's date again. So we're going to say lead reports, and then those curly braces, paste that in there. For the content, so this is where we're going to use the output from get all counts. And I apologize if any of this is confusing, but I wanted to show something that you can do even when you haven't gotten the output, but you know what the output of a given step is going to be. So with that being said, all we're going to be doing is referencing the key and the value from get all counts. So we're going to be referencing error count and then the error count value, and then the success count key and the success key value. Because this is coming through as an array, which I will show you in just a moment, we can't actually reference the keys. So we can't reference anything that says success report or error report. Instead, we're going to access them by index, aka what number in this list were they? Were they number 1 or were they number 2? So to start that, we're going to click on get all counts. We're going to come over to items. We're going to hover over key. So again, this will be what refers or is either success count or error count. We're going to right click on it, get JSON path, copy this. And by the way, if this isn't making sense, it should in a moment once we've actually run things. We're going to do curly braces and curly braces, key, colon. Let's come back up here. Now we're going to get the value. So this will be the count, the actual like number count. So sorry. But so I'll right click, double click. Yeah, sorry, it was being a little funny there. Right click, get JSON path again. Highlight that. Come in here. So now we've done the key value, colon, curly braces. So that'll get us our first value. And the reason we can do this as well is because we know we only put in 2 keys. There's not some dynamic number where we're not sure. So if you were doing this with a dynamic number, this hard coding, if you will, wouldn't exactly work, but in our case it will. And also as a point, if you're not familiar with coding or arrays instead of lists, so like within engineering, it starts with a 0 rather than a 1. So anytime you see 0 in this format, that means it's the first item. The second item in our list, and we'll just copy and paste this. This is going to be 1. So I know that's a little confusing if you've not seen it before. You know, when you do your taxes and you claim 0 dependence, you mean 0 dependence, not 1. But that's just terminology within engineering. So this is going to show, you know, either success or error count, and then that value, and then the other one in the value. And we're referencing it this way too, because we don't actually know which order they're going to come back. So this way we can just say, well, whatever order they come back, put it in the email. Last bit, add attachments. So this is where we'll add the exports we just did. So we're going to add 2 items here because we have 2 reports. Oh, I added too many. Let's delete that one. Yes. And by the way, what I did is I just hovered on file attachment, went over to this red X and clicked on that. So for each of these, we can use our JSON snake again. So we're going to pull this first one up to export success report, pull the second one to export error report. Great. From email, we can leave the defaults. We don't need a reply to. We're not CCing anyone. We're not BCCing anyone. That's it. All right, so let's go ahead and run this and see if everything came through. And then I'll just go over that last bit on assigning by the indexes one more time to make sure that's clear. So to debug, open our debug log, run our workflow. Fingers crossed. If you're impatient like me, you like to open it up and just watch things flowing through. Aha, success. And just to double check, let's go into our Gmail. And here we go. So we've got first our error count, :5, success count, :9. Let's make sure that aligns here with our success report. We see this has 10 columns minus the first one for the headers, 9. Yep, that adds up. And then for the errors, so 5 actual columns. And you can see here where the nulls came through. So this is what was missing for each of these records. Great. So let me go back to here. And let me show you one more time what I meant with referencing. So referencing these values. So this is coming from storage 3. And you can see what storage 3 returns is a list. So it's a list of objects again. So when I said storage items or storage 3.items, so out of this list, give me item 0, index 0, so the first item, which is an object, and then give me the key, so error count here, and then, sorry, I got a poll popping up there, and then value, so again, the storage items, or storage 3.items, 0, so this first one, now give me the value, which is 5 here. And same for the other one. So this one, key, success count, value, 9. So I hope that makes sense. Just showing you another way to do things. It's Tray, there's always 5 million different ways to do something. But just like to open it up to all the possibilities. Anyway, so that is the, well, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Let me finish out here so you have all the information. So that last bit, just to reiterate, we added a storage connector to get the final counts for success and errors. We added a CSV editor to export our success, to export our success report. And then we added another CSV editor to export our error report. And then we sent an email to ourselves with all that information. So great job, everyone. Thank you for following along. And if you're watching this later, thank you for watching.